Hello, everybody. Today we are going to be reading the last of our Poe stories, The Murder in the Rue Morgue. This one's going to take a couple of days to probably get through if we're doing this in normal class setting, because this is obviously a much longer story. There's 6 parts to this, so we're going to go through the parts 3 at a time in 2 separate videos. So we're going to go through parts 1, 2, and 3, and then 4, 5, and 6. I'll include the link to the story in the description of this. We're going to use a different link because the way that this one is formatted is a lot easier to read and follow along with. I will also include the link to the vocabulary list. Like always, that makes these things a little bit easier to read so we don't have to constantly stop and do a breakdown like I've done with some of my other videos. So make sure that we are following along, and let's get started. The Murders in the Rue Morgue, Part 1. Paris. In Paris it was, in the summer of 1840. There I first met that strange and interesting young fellow, Auguste Dupin. Dupin was the last member of a well-known family, a family which had once been rich and famous. He himself, however, was far from rich. He cared little about money. He had enough to buy the most necessary things of life, and a few books. He did not trouble himself about the rest. Just books. With books he was happy. We first met when we were both trying to find the same book. As it was a book which few had ever heard of, this chance brought us together in an old bookstore. Later, we met again in that same store, then again in another bookstore. Soon we began to talk. I was deeply interested in the family history he told me. I was surprised, too, at how much and how widely he had read. More important, the force of his busy mind was like a bright light in my soul. I felt that the friendship of such a man would be, for me, riches without price. I therefore told him of my feelings toward him, and he agreed to come and live with me. He would have, I thought, the joy of using my many fine books, and I would have the pleasure of having someone with me, for I was not happy alone. We passed the days reading, writing, and talking. But Dupin was a lover of the night, and at night, often with only the light of the stars to show us the way, we walked the streets of Paris, sometimes talking, sometimes quiet, always thinking. I soon noticed a special reasoning power he had, an unusual reasoning power. Using it gave him great pleasure. He told me once, with a soft and quiet laugh, that most men have windows over their hearts. Through these he could see into their souls. Then he surprised me by telling me what he knew about my own soul. And I found that he knew things about me that I had thought only I could possibly know. His manner at these moments was cold and distant. His eyes looked empty and far away, and his voice became high and nervous. At such times it seemed to me that I saw, not just Dupin, but 2 Dupins, one who coldly put things together and another who just as coldly took them apart. One night we were walking down one of Paris's long and dirty streets. Both of us were busy with our thoughts. Neither had spoken for perhaps 15 minutes. It seemed as if we had each forgotten that the other was there at his side. I soon learned that Dupin had not forgotten me, however. Suddenly he said, "You're right. He is a very little fellow, that's true, and he would be more successful if he acted in lighter, less serious plays." "Yes, there can be no doubt of that," I said. At first I saw nothing strange in this. Dupin had agreed with me with my own thoughts. This, of course, seemed to me quite natural. For a few seconds I continued walking and thinking, but suddenly I realized that Dupin had agreed with something which was only a thought. I had not spoken a single word. I stopped walking and turned to my friend. "Dupin," I said, "Dupin, this is beyond my understanding. How could you know that I was thinking of—" Here I stopped, in order to test him, to learn if he really did know my unspoken thoughts. "How did I know you were thinking of Chantilly?" "Why do you stop? You are thinking that Chantilly is too small for the plays in which he acts." "Well, that is indeed what I was thinking, but tell me, in heaven's name, the method, if method there is, by which you have been able to see into my soul in this matter." Well, it was the fruit seller. Fruit seller? I know no fruit seller. Well, I mean the man who ran into you as we entered this street. It may have been 10 or 15 minutes ago, perhaps less. Yes? Yes, that's true. I remember now. A fruit seller carrying a large basket of apples on his head almost threw me down. But I don't understand why the fruit seller should make me think of Chantilly, or if he did, how you can know that. I will explain. Listen closely now. Let us follow your thoughts from the fruit seller to this play actor Chantilly. These thoughts must have gone like this: from the fruit cellar to the cobblestones, from the cobblestones to the stereotomy, from the stereotomy to Epicurus to Orion, and then to Chantilly. As we turned the street, the fruit seller, walking very quickly past us, ran against you and made you step on some cobblestones which had not been put down evenly. And I could see that the stones had hurt your foot. You spoke a few angry words to yourself and continued walking. But you kept looking down at the cobblestones in the street, so I knew you were still thinking of the stones. Then we came to a small street where they are putting down street stones, which they have cut in a new and very special way. Here your face became brighter, and I saw your lips move. I could not doubt that you were saying the word stereotomy, the name for this new way of cutting stones. It is a strange word, isn't it? But you will remember that we read about it in the newspaper only yesterday. I thought that the word stereotomy must make you think of that old Greek writer named Epicurus, who wrote of something he called atoms. He believed that the world and everything in the heavens above are made of these atoms. Well, not long ago, you and I were talking about Epicurus and his idea of the atoms, ideas which Epicurus wrote down more than 2,000 years ago. We were talking about how much those old ideas are like today's ideas about the earth and the stars and the sky. I felt sure that you would look up to the sky. You did look up. Now I was certain that I had been following your thoughts, as they had in fact come into your mind. I too looked up and saw that the group of stars we call Orion is very bright and clear tonight. I knew you would notice this and think about the name Orion. Now follow my thoughts carefully. Only yesterday in the newspaper there was an article about the actor Chantilly, an article which was not too friendly to Chantilly, not friendly at all. We noticed that the writer of the article had used some words taken from a book we both have read. These ideas were about Orion, so I knew you would put together the two ideas of Orion and Chantilly. I saw you smile, remembering that article and the hard words in it. Then I saw you stand straighter, as tall as you could make yourself. I was sure you were thinking of Chantilly's size and especially his height. He is small. He is short. And as I spoke, saying that he is indeed a very little fellow, this Chantilly, and that he would be much more successful if he acted in lighter, less serious plays. I will not say that I was surprised. I was more than surprised. I was astonished. Dupin was right. As right as he could be, those were in fact my thoughts, my unspoken thoughts, as my mind moved from one thought to the next. But if I was astonished by this, I would soon be more than astonished. One morning, this strangely interesting man showed me once again his unusual reasoning power. We heard that an old woman had been killed by unknown persons. The killer, or killers, had cut her head off and escaped into the night. Who was this killer, this murderer? The police had no answers. They had looked everywhere and found nothing that helped them. They did not know what to do next, and so they did nothing. But not Dupin. He knew what to do. So that is the end of part one. If you haven't pieced it together at this point, this is what is known as the first detective story. This is the exact story that gave rise to Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot and any of those famous detectives, Sam Spade or Marlowe or any of the other famous detectives from the old stories and the old film noirs. All of it started here with this story. The idea that we can detect and learn everything about somebody through careful observation, so much so that we can figure out where they've been or what they've done or even what they're thinking right now. Part 2. It was in Paris in the summer of 1840 when I met Auguste Dupin. He was an unusually interesting young man with a busy, forceful mind. The mind could, it seemed, look right through a man's body into his soul and uncover his deepest thoughts. Sometimes he seemed to be not one but two people, one who coldly put things together and another who just as coldly took them apart. One morning, in the heat of the summer, Dupin showed me once again his special reasoning power. We read in the newspaper about a terrible killing. An old woman and her daughter, living alone in an old house in the Rue Morgue, had been killed in the middle of the night. Paris, July 7th, 1840. In the early morning today, the people of the western part of the city were awakened from their sleep by cries of terror, which came, it seemed, from a house in the street called the Rue Morgue. The only persons living in the house were an old woman, Miss L'Épinay, and her daughter. Several neighbors and a policeman ran towards the house, but by the time they reached it, the cries had stopped. When no one answered the calls, they forced the door open. As they rushed in, they heard voices, two voices. They seemed to come from above. The group hurried from room to room, but they found nothing until they reached the fourth floor. There they found a door that was firmly closed, locked with the key inside. Quickly they forced the door open, and they saw spread before them a bloody, sickening scene, a scene of horror. The room was in the wildest possible order. Broken chairs and tables were lying all around the room. There was only one bed, and from it everything had been taken and thrown into the middle of the floor. There was blood everywhere, on the floor, on the bed, on the walls. A sharp knife covered with blood was lying on the floor. In front of the fireplace there was some long gray hair, also bloody. It seemed to have been pulled from a human head. On the floor were 4 pieces of gold, an earring, several objects made of silver, and 2 bags containing a large amount of money in gold. Clothes had been thrown around the room. A box was found under the bed covers. It was open and held only a few old letters and papers. There was no one there, or so it seemed. Above the fireplace they found the dead body of the daughter. It had been put up into the opening where the smoke escapes to the sky. The body was still warm. There was blood on the face, and on the neck there were dark, deep marks which seemed to have been made by strong fingers. These marks surely show how the daughter was killed. After hunting in every part of the house without finding anything more, the group went outside. Behind the building they found the body of the old woman. Her neck was almost cut through, and when they tried to lift her up, her head fell off. The next day the newspaper offered to its readers these new facts. The murders in the Rue Morgue, Paris, July 8th, 1840. The police had talked with many people about the terrible killings in the old houses on the Rue Morgue, but nothing had been learned to answer the question of who the killers were. Pauline de Bourges, a washwoman, says she had known both the dead women for more than 3 years and had washed their clothes during that period. The old lady and her daughter seemed to love each other dearly. They always paid her well. They did not know where the money came from, she said. She had never met anyone in the house. Only the 2 women lived on the 4th floor. Pierre Moreau, a shopkeeper, says L'Espinay had bought food at his shop for nearly 4 years. She owned the house and had lived in it more than 6 years. People say they had money. He never saw anyone enter the door except the old lady and her daughter and a doctor 8 or 10 times, perhaps. Many other persons' neighbors said the same thing. Almost no one ever went into the house. Miss L'Espinay and her daughter were not often seen. Jules Minaud, a banker, said that Miss L'Espinay had put money in his bank beginning 8 years before. 3 days before her death, she took out of the bank a large amount of money in gold. A man from the bank carried it for her to her house. Isidore Musset, a policeman, says that he was with the group that first entered the house. While he was going up the stairs, he heard 2 voices, one low and soft, and one hard, high, and very strange. The voice of someone who was certainly not French, the voice of a foreigner, Spanish perhaps. It was not a woman's voice. He could not understand what it said, but the low voice, the softer voice, said in French, "My God." Alfonso Garcia, who is Spanish and lives on the Rue Morgue, said he entered the house but did not go up the stairs. He is nervous and afraid that he might be ill. He heard the voices. He believes the high voice was not that of a Frenchman. Perhaps it was English, but he doesn't understand English, so he is not sure. William Byrd, another foreigner, an Englishman, said that he was one of the persons who entered the house. He has lived in Paris for 2 years. He heard the voices. The low voice was that of a Frenchman. He was sure, because he heard it say in French, "My God." The high voice was very loud. He is sure it was not the voice of an Englishman, nor the voice of a Frenchman. It seemed to be that of an Italian. It might have been a woman's voice. He does not understand Italian. Mr. Alberto Montani, an Italian, was passing by the house at the time of the cries. He says that they lasted for about 2 minutes. They were screams, long and loud, terrible, fearful sounds. Montani, who speaks Spanish but not French, said that he also heard 2 voices. He thought both voices were French, but he could not understand any of the words spoken. The persons who entered the house all agree that the door inside of the room where the daughter's body was found was locked on the inside. When they reached the door, everything was quiet. When they forced the door, they saw no one inside. The windows were closed and firmly locked on the inside. There are no steps that someone could have gone down while they were going up. They say that the openings over the fireplace are too small for anyone to have escaped through them. It took 4 or 5 people to pull the daughter's body out of the openings of the fireplace. A careful search was made through the whole house. It was 4 or 5 minutes from the time they heard the voices to the moment they forced open the door of the room. Paul Dumont, a doctor, said that he was called to see the bodies soon after they were found. They were in horrible condition, badly marked and broken. Such results could not have come from a woman's hands, only from those of a very powerful man. The daughter had been killed by strong hands around her neck. The police have learned nothing more than this. The killing as strange as this has never before happened in Paris. The police do not know where to begin to look for answers. When we had finished reading the newspaper's account of the murders, neither Dupin nor myself said anything for a while. But I could see in his eyes that cold, empty look, which told me that his mind was working busily. When he asked me what I thought of all this, I could only agree with all Paris. I told him I considered it a very difficult problem, a mystery, to which it was not possible to find an answer. No, no, said Dupin. No, I think you are wrong. A mystery it is, yes, but there must be an answer. Let us go to the house and see what we can see. There must be an answer. There must. It's probably also a good time to mention that in The Murders in the Rue Morgue, this was published as a serial, which means that each of these parts was published in monthly installments, which is why they go back and repeat himself a little bit at the beginning of each section. So even though you already know this, it's kind of like the last time on parts when you see TV shows. It was in Paris that I met Auguste Dupin. He was an unusually interesting young man with a busy, forceful mind. This mind could, it seemed, look right through a man's body into his deepest soul. One hot summer morning, we read in the newspapers about a terrible killing. The dead persons were an old woman and her unmarried daughter who lived alone on the 4th floor of an old house on a street called the Rue Morgue. Someone had taken the daughter's neck in powerful fingers and pressed with fearful strength until her life was gone. Her mother's body was found outside behind the house with the head nearly cut off. The knife with which she was killed was found, however, in the room on the floor. Several neighbors ran to the house when they heard the woman's cries of fear. As they ran up to the 4th floor, they heard 2 other voices, but when they reached the room and broke down the door, they found no living person in the room. Like the door, the 2 windows were firmly closed, locked on the inside. There was no other way the killer could have gotten in or out of the room. The Paris police did not know where to begin to look for the answer. I told Dupin that it seemed to me that it was not possible to learn the answer to the mystery of these killings. No, no, said Dupin. No, I think that you are wrong. A mystery it is, yes, but there must be an answer. We must not judge what is possible just by what we have read in the newspapers. The Paris police work hard and often get good results, but there is no real method in what they do. When something more than simple hard work is needed, when a little real method is needed, the police fail. Sometimes they stand too near the problem. Often, if a person looks at something very closely, he can see a few things more clearly, but the shape of the whole thing escapes him. There must be an answer. There must. Let us go to the house and see what we can see. I know the head of the police, and he will allow us to do so. And this will be interesting and give us some pleasure. I thought it strange that Dupin should believe that we would get pleasure out of this, but I said nothing. It was late in the afternoon when we reached the house on the Rue Morgue. It was easily found, for there were still many persons, in fact a crowd, standing there looking at it. But going in, we walked all around it, and Dupin carefully looked at the neighboring houses as well as this one. I could not understand the reason for such great care. We came again to the front of the house and went in. We went up the stairs into the room where the daughter's body had been found. Both bodies were there. The police had left the room as they had found it. I saw nothing beyond what the newspaper had told us. Dupin looked with great care at everything, at the bodies, the walls, the fireplace, the windows. Then we went home. Dupin said nothing. I could see the cold look in his eyes, which told me that his mind was working busily, quickly. I asked no questions. Dupin said nothing until the next morning, when he came into my room and asked me suddenly if I had not noticed something especially strange about what we saw at the house on the Rue Morgue. I replied, "Nothing more than what we both read in the newspaper." "Tell me, friend, how shall we explain the horrible force, the unusual strength used in these murders? And whose were the voices that we heard? No one was found except the young women, yet there was no way for anyone to escape, and the wild condition of the room, the body, which was found head down above the fireplace, the terrible broken appearance of the body of that old lady with its head cut off, those are all so far from what might be expected that the police are standing still. They don't know where to begin. Well, these things are all unusual indeed, but they are not deep mysteries. We should not ask, what has happened, but what has happened that has never happened before? In fact, the very things that the police think cannot possibly be explained are the things which will lead me to the answer. Indeed, I believe that they have already led me to the answer." I was so surprised I could not say a word. Dupin looked quickly at the door. I am now waiting for a person who will know something about these murders, these wild killings. I do not think he did them himself, but I think he will know the killer. I hope I am right about this. If I am, then I expect to find the whole answer today. I expect the man here, in this room, at any moment. It is true that he may not come, but he probably will. Well, but who is this person? How did you find him? I'll tell you. While we're waiting for this man we do not know, for I have never met him, while we wait, I will tell you how my thoughts went. Dupin began to talk, but it did not seem that he was trying to explain to me what he had thought. It seemed that he was talking to himself. He looked not at me, but at the wall. "It has been fully proved that the voices heard by the neighbors were not the voices of the women who were killed. Someone else was in the room. It is therefore certain that the old woman did not first kill her daughter and then kill herself. She would not have been strong enough to put her daughter's body where it was found, and the manner of the old lady's death shows that she could not have caused it herself. A person can kill himself with a knife, yes, but he surely cannot cut his own head almost off and then drop the knife on the floor and jump out the window. It was murder, then, done by some third person or persons. And the voices heard were the voices of those persons. Let's now think carefully about the things people said about those voices. Did you notice anything especially strange in what was told about them?" "Well, yes. Everybody agreed that the low voice was the voice of a Frenchman, but they could not agree about the high voice." "Ah, that was what they said, yes, but that was not what was so strange about what they said. You say that you have noticed nothing that makes their stories very different from what might have been expected, yet there was something. All these persons, as you say, agree about the low voice, but not the high, hard voice. The strange thing here is that when an Italian, an Englishman, a Spaniard, and a Frenchman tried to tell what the voice was like, each one said that it sounded like the voice of a foreigner. How strangely unusual that voice must have been. Here are 4 men from 4 big countries, and not one of them could understand what the voice said. Each one gave it a different name. Now, I know there are other countries in the world. You will say that perhaps it was the voice of someone from one of those other lands, Russia perhaps. But remember, not one of those people heard anything that sounded like a separate word." Here Dupin turned and looked into my eyes. "This is what we have learned from the newspapers. I don't know what I have led you to think, but I believe that in this much of the story there are enough facts to lead us in the one and only direction to the right answer. What this answer is, I will not say. Not yet. But I want you to keep in mind that this much was enough to tell me what I must look for when we were in that house on the Rue Morgue. And I found it. We will end here. That is the end of part 3. We will pick up with parts 4, 5, and 6 tomorrow. So give us some time. Think about this mystery. Who could have caused this? This person or persons that seem to all speak in different languages at the same time, that were somehow able to murder someone and then return the knife upstairs, stuff someone up a chimney. Who could have done such a thing?